Have you ever wondered what silence really says about you? Not the quiet that fills a room when no one is talking, but the silence that comes after you stop explaining yourself to people who never cared to understand you. That silence, the one that follows your last attempt to be heard, to be seen, to be enough. What if that silence is not your weakness, but your greatest weapon? They say strength is shown in battle, in loudness, in argument, in resistance. But there's another kind of strength, one so rare that few ever learn to wield it, the power of restraint. The ability to stay still while the world provokes you, to remain composed when ego screams for validation, and to hold your tongue when words would only cheapen your truth. This is where our story begins. Not in chaos, but in calm. A man named Elias once believed that being heard was the same as being understood. He lived his life trying to prove himself, to friends, to strangers, to the world. Every misunderstanding became a battle he had to win. Every loss of approval felt like a wound. He chased explanations, he begged for closure, he defended his worth. And every time he lost a little more of himself. It wasn't that Elias was weak, it was that he misunderstood what power really was. He believed power came from control. Control of others' opinions, control of outcomes, control of how the world saw him. But the more he tried to control, the more he realized how little control he actually had. One night after another argument that ended in silence, the kind of silence that stings, Elias sat alone in his room. The light from his phone flickered on his face. Messages unanswered, calls ignored. He had said everything he could say, pleaded every reason, explained every thought. Yet the more he spoke, the more distant everything felt. And in that moment he felt something break. Not out of pain, but clarity. He turned the phone face down. For the first time, he didn't send another message. He didn't justify, didn't chase, didn't beg. He simply let the silence stretch between him and the world. And in that stillness, something strange began to happen. At first, the silence felt unbearable, like a void swallowing his identity. Every instinct screamed at him to fill it, to say something, anything. But as the hours passed, that silence transformed. It stopped feeling like emptiness and started feeling like space. Space to breathe, to think, to simply be. For years, Elias had spoken to defend his image. Now, he began to see that silence was defending something far greater, his peace. That night became a quiet turning point. He began to withdraw not out of defeat, but out of strength. The world expected noise from him, reactions, explanations, apologies, but he gave them nothing. And the less he said, the more powerful he became. People grew uneasy with his silence, not because they misunderstood him, but because they could no longer control him. You see, when you stop chasing, the world loses its grip on you. When you stop explaining, others are left to face the echo of their own thoughts. When you stop begging, you force the world to see your absence as strength, not weakness. Elias began to realize something the Stoics had known for centuries. That silence is not retreat. It is mastery. The strongest man is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who can walk away without needing to be understood. Over time, his silence became a mirror. It reflected people's true intentions back at them. Those who valued noise drifted away. Those who valued depth began to notice. And slowly, he saw that solitude didn't mean loneliness. It meant freedom. But freedom, he would learn, comes at a cost. Because silence, while powerful, also exposes what was once hidden. When the noise stops, the mind begins to speak. And not all voices inside are kind. In the days that followed, Elias began to face the one person he had avoided the most, himself. The world outside grew quieter, but inside, storms still raged. Regret, shame, fear, the emotions he had drowned in constant conversation, now surfaced, demanding to be faced. There were no distractions, no arguments, no validation left to hide behind. Only the raw truth of who he was, unfiltered and unguarded. That's when he began to understand what the Stoics meant when they said, "A man conquers the world by conquering himself." Elias had spent years trying to fix how others saw him. Now, he realized he had never truly seen himself. His silence became a teacher, not the kind that lectures, but the kind that reveals. It taught him that peace isn't found in being understood, but in no longer needing to be. And as the days passed, something shifted within him. He woke earlier, he moved slower, he spoke less. And yet, he felt more alive than ever before. Every time he resisted the urge to explain himself, he grew lighter. Every time he chose silence over reaction, he grew stronger. His friends began to notice. "Why don't you argue anymore?" they'd ask. "Why don't you fight back?" He would simply smile, a calm, knowing smile, and say nothing. Because once you found your center, you no longer need to prove it. The silence that had once felt like a punishment had become his power. He had discovered that stillness is not the absence of action. It is the highest form of control. To remain calm in chaos, composed under criticism, and unmoved by misunderstanding, that is the essence of mastery. And so began the transformation of a man who once begged to be heard into a man who found peace in not speaking. The journey ahead would test him. His patience, his heart, his philosophy. But for now, in the quiet of his own soul, Elias understood something the world rarely teaches. That the less you explain yourself, the more others are forced to understand who you truly are. Have you ever wondered why the world reacts so strongly when you stop reacting? Why people who once ignored your words suddenly notice your absence? Strange, isn't it? How silence can speak louder than explanation. If you stay with me until the end of this video, you'll discover how your calmness can disarm chaos, how your detachment can attract power, and how mastering silence can change not just your relationships, but your entire life. Elias was beginning to feel the strength of his new stillness. Days passed, then weeks. He spoke little, explained less, and observed more. But the world wasn't ready for his silence. The moment he stopped chasing people, they began to chase him. Those who had once ignored his presence now wanted his attention. It confused them. How someone so responsive could suddenly disappear into calm detachment. They needed his reaction, his words, his explanations to feel in control. But Elias gave them nothing, and that's when the real test began. One morning he received a message from someone he once cared deeply for, a person who had left him in silence long before he learned to embrace it himself. "We need to talk," the message read, his heart stirred. Old memories rose like ghosts. The old Elias would have responded instantly. Long messages, apologies, explanations, but not this time. He simply read it and placed the phone down. The silence that followed was unbearable, not because of her, but because of himself. His mind fought him. What if she needs closure? What if ignoring her makes you look cold? What if you lose her for good? But beneath those thoughts, another voice whispered, a quieter, stronger one. You owe no explanation for your peace. Elias didn't reply that day. He didn't reply the next either. Eventually, the messages stopped coming. What replaced them was not regret, but freedom. A kind of freedom that felt both light and terrifying. He realized then, silence isn't just about not speaking, it's about trusting that truth needs no defense. But silence doesn't just test your patience, it tests your identity. The world is addicted to reaction. It thrives on noise, arguments, and attention. When you remove your energy from chaos, chaos starts to unravel. Elias began to notice this in every area of his life. At work, he stopped explaining every small decision, stopped justifying his ideas to those who doubted him. Instead, he let results speak. Slowly, people stopped questioning him. They began to listen when he did speak. Because his words had become rare, and rare things hold value among friends, he stopped engaging in endless debates. The ones who thrived on drama lost interest. The ones who respected his peace stayed close. His circle grew smaller but stronger. Even strangers could feel it. There's something magnetic about a person who isn't desperate to be seen or heard. They command attention without asking for it. Silence, Elias realized, wasn't emptiness, it was presence. And yet silence isn't an escape. It's a mirror. It reflects not just your peace but your fears. In moments of solitude, the mind begins to whisper. Old doubts, past mistakes, the noise within. Elias faced it all. There were nights when he questioned everything. Was he truly free, or just running away from connection? Was silence making him strong, or slowly isolating him? But in those moments, he remembered the words of Marcus Aurelius. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. And so he chose silence not as withdrawal, but as intention. To be deliberate, to be centered, to live with dignity rather than explanation. As time passed, Elias noticed another transformation. He was no longer chasing people, they were chasing his energy. He was no longer begging for respect. It was being offered naturally, and he no longer explained his worth. It was visible in his composure. That's when he understood the truth. When you stop explaining yourself, your presence becomes the explanation. Every word you don't speak becomes power conserved. Every chase you refuse becomes energy reclaimed. Every time you choose silence over argument, you train your mind to master itself. The world doesn't reward noise, it rewards clarity, and clarity is born from calm. So if you've ever felt like your silence made you invisible, remember this: people see what they can't control. And nothing is more powerful than being unbothered in a world desperate to provoke you. Your silence is not weakness, it's strategy. It's a boundary that protects your energy, your time, and your sanity. And once you learn to wield it, you'll realize peace was never found in proving yourself to others, but in proving to yourself that you no longer need to. Have you ever noticed how silence unsettles people? It exposes their insecurities, their impatience, their need to control the space between words. The truth is, when you master silence, you hold a kind of power that most people can't comprehend. A quiet dominance that doesn't need to shout, argue, or explain. Stay with me until the end of this section, because what you'll discover isn't just how silence protects you, it's how it transforms you into something untouchable. As the months passed, Elias's life took on a strange new rhythm. He no longer lived in reaction to the world, he observed. He listened. He moved with calm precision, like someone who had finally learned to see things others overlooked. This new version of him made people uneasy. They could sense the change, the confidence that didn't need validation, the stillness that couldn't be provoked. At first, people mistook his silence for weakness. They assumed he'd given up, that his calm was a disguise for defeat. But silence has a way of revealing truth with time. Slowly, those same people began to realize that Elias hadn't lost anything. In fact, he had gained something they couldn't name, something they wanted but didn't understand. Because when you're silent, people project onto you. They create stories, assumptions, fears, and the more they try to figure you out, the more they reveal themselves. Elias noticed this everywhere, in conversations, meetings, even casual encounters. The louder others spoke, the more he understood them. The quieter he remained, the more they respected him. It was then he realized a strange paradox. The less you speak, the more your words matter. When Elias finally did speak, people listened. Not because his words were perfect, but because they were rare, and rare things carry weight. His silence had purified his thoughts, sharpened his perception. He no longer spoke to fill space, he spoke to create impact. And that, he realized, was the essence of influence. But influence always invites challenge. There were still those who tried to provoke him, to break his composure, to drag him back into the noise. Some would question his silence. Why don't you respond? They'd sneer. Don't you have anything to say? And sometimes in the past, those words would have pierced him. But now, Elias understood something profound. When people demand your reaction, what they really want is control. Every time you stay calm, you deny them that control. And that denial burns them more than any argument ever could. He remembered something his mentor once told him. People who are at war with themselves will always look for someone to fight. Elias no longer joined those wars. He let others battle their own chaos while he walked through life untouched. His silence was not indifference, it was awareness. It was awareness. Awareness that not every argument deserves your energy, that peace is not found in being right, but in being free. Still, silence isn't just about withholding words. It's about mastery of emotions, reactions, and timing. Elias learned to pause before speaking, to breathe before deciding, to listen before judging. That pause, that sacred moment between thought and action, became his new form of power. It gave him clarity in chaos, patience in conflict, and presence in moments of uncertainty. The world around him hadn't changed. The noise, the demands, the ego, it was all still there. But he had changed. He no longer absorbed it. He let it pass through him like wind through an open window. And something remarkable happened. His energy began to attract people who valued calm over chaos, purpose over drama. The loud ones drifted away. The grounded ones drew near. He had become a quiet force, steady and unwavering, not because he wanted power, but because he no longer needed it from others. Elias finally understood the Stoic truth. The greatest power is to be self-controlled, and silence, true disciplined silence, is the foundation of that control. It allows you to respond with reason, not impulse. To see the world as it is, not as your emotions want it to be. To live from within rather than react from without. As days turned into seasons, Elias's presence became a paradox, invisible yet undeniable. He didn't chase people, and yet they came to him. He didn't beg for understanding, and yet his actions spoke volumes. He didn't explain his peace because his peace explained everything. He had become something rare in this world, unbothered, grounded, unshakable. And when you reach that state, you don't just survive life's storms, you become the storm. Because true silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of strength. Have you ever reached a moment when life tested the very strength you thought you had mastered? When your calm is pushed, your silence mocked, and your peace feels like a fragile illusion? Because that's the true test of discipline. Not when everything is still, but when chaos knocks at your door and demands a reaction. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what happens next will show you that silence isn't just power, it's survival. Elias had built his life around peace. He had learned to stay centered in storms, to resist the pull of noise. But life, in its unkind way, always finds a way to test conviction. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply presents the storm. It began with betrayal. Not from an enemy, but from someone he trusted. A friend, a partner. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it cut deep. Words twisted, promises broken, his name used in ways that painted him as the villain. And as those lies spread, people turned away. For the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel powerful. It felt like a prison. The temptation to defend himself was overwhelming. Every instinct begged him to speak, to explain, to fight back. But he remembered what he had learned. Never chase, never beg, and never explain. He took a deep breath, and for 3 long days he said nothing. No posts, no messages, no justifications. Just stillness. Those 3 days felt like an eternity. The world spun with rumors. Friends questioned his silence. Some even accused him of guilt for not defending himself. But Elias knew something most people never learn. That truth does not rush to justify itself. Truth stands quietly while lies exhaust themselves. By the 5th day, the noise began to fade. The ones who spread the rumors moved on to their next target. The ones who truly knew him stayed, and those who doubted him revealed who they were. Elias lost many, but he gained something greater. Clarity. He realized that silence not only protects peace, it exposes truth. It filters the world. Those who can't handle your silence were never ready for your truth. And when the dust finally settled, something shifted inside him. He was no longer angry. He was no longer hurt. He simply understood. Not everyone deserves your words, your explanations, or your energy. That moment changed him. He saw how the world feeds on attention, how people thrive on reaction. And the more you feed it, the more it consumes you. But when you refuse to react, the cycle breaks. Your stillness starves the chaos. From that day on, Elias stopped explaining anything. Not his choices, not his priorities, not his peace. He became an observer of his own life. The less he said, the more the world revealed itself. He began to see people clearly, who sought to understand him and who simply wanted to use his energy to fill their own emptiness. Silence had stripped him of illusions, and in that emptiness, he found something far more valuable than approval. He found himself. He started spending mornings in reflection, evenings in solitude. He read the Stoics again, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and he saw their words not as philosophy, but as truth lived through experience. He understood now what Seneca meant when he said, "He who is brave is free, because silence had given him bravery. The courage to let go, to be misunderstood, to walk away without closure. That kind of strength cannot be faked. It can only be earned in the quiet hours when no one is watching. And the reward? Freedom. Freedom from overthinking. Freedom from needing validation. Freedom from explaining yourself to people who already made up their minds. Elias's world became smaller, but it was now his own. No noise, no performance, no chase, just peace. Steady, unwavering, grounded. And here's the truth. When you reach that point, you stop searching for power because you are power. You stop looking for peace because you embody it. You stop explaining your worth because your presence speaks it for you. The silence that once hurt now healed. The silence that once isolated now connected him to something greater. The quiet rhythm of life itself. And in that rhythm, Elias found the truest form of strength. To remain calm when the world demands chaos. Because silence, in its purest form, is not about muting the world. It's about hearing yourself again. Have you ever realized that silence isn't the absence of sound, but the presence of everything that truly matters? It's where wisdom hides, where peace is born, where truth whispers quietly beneath the noise. Stay until the end of this section, because once you understand what Elias finally learned, you'll never look at silence the same way again. Months had passed since Elias had withdrawn from the world's noise. Life around him had changed, or perhaps he had changed enough to see it differently. Where he once saw chaos, he now saw patterns. Where he once saw betrayal, he now saw lessons. Where he once craved understanding, he now valued detachment. He had stopped explaining himself long ago. People either understood him through his actions or drifted away, trying to decode his quiet. He no longer fought either outcome. He had reached a rare state of peace, the kind that comes not from winning arguments, but from no longer needing to have them. One evening, as the sun sank low and the city buzzed in the distance, Elias sat quietly by his window. No phone, no distractions, no expectations, just stillness. And it was there, in that complete silence, that a realization came to him. Silence is not the refuge of the weak, it is the fortress of the wise. He understood now why the Stoics valued restraint above all. Because silence is not just what you withhold, it's what you choose to protect, your energy, your time, your sanity, your dignity. When you stop explaining, you stop negotiating your value. When you stop chasing, you stop giving your power away. When you stop begging, you stop living as if love or respect must be earned. Elias had learned to sit with discomfort, to let things unfold without forcing them. He stopped rushing outcomes, stopped proving his worth to those too blind to see it. He became untouchable, not because the world stopped testing him, but because nothing outside him could disturb the calm he had built within. And something miraculous began to happen. Opportunities began to come, not because he sought them, but because his stillness made him magnetic. People felt it, that rare composure, that quiet certainty. They didn't know what it was, but they wanted to be around it. That's the paradox of silence. When you no longer chase, the world begins to chase you. Because silence carries mystery, and mystery commands respect. The ones who used to overlook Elias now look to him for guidance. The ones who once doubted his quiet now found comfort in it. And through it all, he never explained himself, because explanation only weakens truth. He had mastered what few ever do, to remain calm when attacked, to stay silent when provoked, and to act only when purpose demanded. That's when he realized the ultimate Stoic truth, that the greatest battles are not fought with others, but within ourselves. To silence your ego when it craves validation, to quiet your anger when it demands revenge, to calm your fears when they scream for control, that is mastery. And mastery doesn't shout, it whispers. It moves through life with grace, never rushing, never chasing, never begging, just being, present, aware, unmoved. Elias's journey had come full circle. What began as pain became purpose. What began as confusion became clarity. What began as silence became his superpower. And as he sat there, watching the last light fade beyond the horizon, he smiled, not because everything made sense, but because he no longer needed it to. Silence had taught him the only truth that mattered. You do not have to explain your peace. You do not have to prove your worth. You do not have to chase what's already yours. In a world addicted to noise, your calm becomes rebellion. Your silence becomes influence, and your detachment becomes strength. So the next time the world demands your reaction, remember Elias. Remember what he learned through pain, through loss, through stillness. Never chase, never beg, never explain. Because your silence, when mastered, becomes the loudest voice in any room. Have you ever asked yourself what real power feels like? Not the kind that controls others, but the kind that controls you? The kind that needs no validation, no attention, no approval? The kind that can sit in silence and still feel whole? Stay until the very end of this final reflection, because this is where everything Elias learned becomes not just his truth, but a truth you can carry into your own life. Time had passed and silence had become second nature to Elias. He no longer had to remind himself not to react, not to explain, not to chase. It wasn't restraint anymore, it was identity. His stillness had become his rhythm, his peace had become his home. He would walk through the world and feel no need to speak unless it was necessary. He didn't rush conversations or defend choices. He didn't explain where he'd been or why he'd changed. Those who needed to understand never asked. Those who demanded explanations never mattered. That's when he realized something profound. True peace is not the absence of noise, but the absence of need. He had learned to live without needing to be seen, to be heard, or to be right. He had become content with a simple act of being. And in that state, he found what every soul quietly searches for: freedom. Not the kind written about in books or chanted in movements, but the quiet personal freedom that comes from mastering your own emotions. Freedom from overthinking, freedom from proving, freedom from pleasing, freedom from the endless chase of being understood. Elias had become untouchable, not because life stopped testing him, but because he stopped letting it define him. When people doubted him, he smiled. When they misunderstood him, he wished them well. When they left, he thanked them for teaching him who he no longer needed to be. His silence was not a wall, it was a boundary, a sacred space that separated his peace from the world's chaos. One day, a former friend approached him and asked, "How did you do it? How did you stop caring what everyone thinks?" Elias thought for a long moment before answering, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and certain. "I didn't stop caring," he said. "I just started caring about the right things. My peace, my purpose, my growth, and when you start protecting those, the noise loses its power." The friend nodded, unsure if he truly understood. Because silence can only be understood by those who have heard its voice. That night, Elias wrote in his journal one final entry, not for the world, but for himself. "I used to think silence was empty. Now I know it's full of answers, full of truth, full of strength. I no longer need to speak to be understood. My peace speaks for me." He closed the book, exhaled deeply, and let the quiet fill the room. There was no grand ending, no applause, no validation. Just stillness, the kind that hums with peace rather than fear. Elias had learned what few ever do, that silence is not about saying nothing, but about saying everything without words. And that is the essence of Stoicism, to remain unshaken by the noise of the world, to live from within, and to understand that real power doesn't announce itself, it simply exists. So, as you sit here, listening to this final reflection, ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped chasing? Who would you become if you stopped explaining? What peace would you discover if you allowed silence to speak for you? The answer lies not in what you say next, but in what you don't. Because silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom, it's power, it's peace. Never chase, never beg, never explain. Your silence is your superpower. Protect it, and it will protect you.